generations, when people imagined the Vikings, the picture was always the same. Bearded warriors, long ships cutting into icy seas, axes raised under a stormy sky, and behind them, women quietly waiting at home, spinning wool, cooking meals, raising children. And what if that story isn't entirely true? What if the women of the Viking world were far more powerful than history first believed? What if some of them sailed, traded, ruled kingdoms, and even fought? Tonight on Nightly Haven, we're diving into a mystery historians are still debating. Who were Viking women really? Were they simply wives and mothers? Or were they something far more dangerous? To understand Viking women, we first have to step into their world. The Viking Age lasted roughly around 793 AD to 1066 AD. It began with a violent shock to Europe, the infamous raid on the monastery of Lindisfarne Monastery in 793. Monks wrote about demons arriving from the sea, but those demons were Norse warriors from Scandinavia, from what we now know as Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. These societies were brutal, adventurous, and deeply connected to their gods. And while men often sailed abroad, Viking society was surprisingly complex back home, which brings us to the women. Because unlike medieval cultures, Viking women had rights, and real rights, which I thought was perfect for Women's Month. In Viking society, women could do things that many women in medieval Europe could not. They could own property, divorce their husbands, run farms and businesses, and inherit wealth. That may not sound revolutionary today, but in the 9th and 10th century, that was nearly unheard of. In fact, Viking law allowed a woman to divorce a husband for abuse and neglect. Imagine a medieval woman simply saying, "I'm done," and legally leaving. She could also take back her dowry and property. In many cases, when men left on long voyages, women ran the entire household economy. Farms, trade, finances. In other words, the Vikings were out conquering the world, the women were keeping civilization alive. Now we arrive at one of the most debated mysteries in Viking history: shieldmaidens, legendary female warriors described in Norse sagas. The sagas tell stories of women who fought alongside men. One of the most famous is Lagertha, described by the historian Saxo Grammaticus. According to the legend, Lagertha was a fierce warrior who helped defeat an invading king. But historians long believed these stories were just mythology, until something strange happened. In the 1800s, archaeologists uncovered extraordinary grave in Burka. Inside was a sword, arrows, a battle axe, 2 war horses, and a full set of elite warrior gear. For more than a century, everyone assumed the skeleton was male, but in 2017, scientists ran DNA tests. The result shocked the archaeological world. The warrior was a woman. This grave, known as BJ581, belonged to a high-ranking Viking warrior. The discovery reignited the shield maiden debate overnight. Had historians underestimated Viking women all along? But war might not have been the only place Viking women had influence. The Vikings weren't just raiders, they were global traders. Their trade routes stretched from Scandinavia all the way out to Constantinople, Baghdad, and North America. And archaeological evidence shows women traveled too. One of the most famous Viking settlements discovered in North America is Lynx Ox Meadows. Totally no, I didn't say that right. Evidence suggests that Viking families, not just warriors, lived there, which means women were part of these early voyages across the Atlantic. Imagine that. 1,000 years before Columbus, Viking women were possibly walking the shores of North America. Now we enter the most mysterious role Viking women held: spiritual power. In Norse culture, certain women practiced a form of magic called seer. These women were known as vulvas. They were feared and respected and sometimes avoided. Why? Because they were believed to see the future. Even the chief Norse god Odin was said to have practiced seer. Vulvas traveled from villages to villages performing rituals. They carried staffs and wore elaborate cloaks. and when they spoke, people listened. Some historians believe these women held immense social power, and in some cases, even more than chieftains. History also records powerful Viking women who ruled. One of the most famous was, I am going to slaughter this, Freydis Eyrikdottir, daughter of Eric the Red. According to the sagas, during the battle with ingenious warriors in North America, Freydis reportedly grabbed a sword and fought while pregnant. Whether every detail is true is debated, but the legends reveal something important. Viking culture did not see strong women as strange, it saw them as formidable. So why were Viking women long reduced to housewives? Partly because of who wrote history. Much of what we know about Vikings was written by Christian monks in Europe. These writers often viewed Norse culture as barbaric, and powerful women didn't fit the social norms of the time. So stories of female warriors were often dismissed as fantasy, but archaeology keeps uncovering clues the story may be more complicated than that. Weapons buried with women, trade goods belonging to female travelers, evidence of female leadership. Piece by piece, the Viking world is being rewritten. Some historians believe Viking society may have far more balance between men and women than previously thought. Not perfectly equal, but far from the stereotype of silent wives. In fact, some scholars argue that Vikings may have been one of the most social flexible systems for women in the early medieval Europe, which raises an interesting possibility. Maybe shieldmaidens weren't mythical superheroes. Maybe they were simply rare but real women who stepped into battle when necessary, and over time their stories grew into legend. Even today, historians still argue over this topic. Some say the sagas exaggerated female warriors. Others say we're only beginning to discover their true role. New DNA testing and burial analysis are changing what we know every year, which means the truth may lie somewhere between myth and reality. And honestly, that's where history gets interesting. The Viking Age nearly ended 1,000 years ago, but the mystery of the Viking women is only beginning to unfold. They may have been farmers, merchants, mystics, explorers, and possibly warriors. History once tried to place them quietly in the background, but the evidence buried beneath Scandinavian soil tells another story. A story of women who were far stronger, far more influential, and far more dangerous than we once believed. And maybe, just maybe, some of the fiercest Vikings to ever live were never men at all. Happy Women's Month, guys. Bye.